Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. Again, we're Tim and Holly Nyquist. If you'd like to communicate with us, you can do so through the blog spot at doubleroadrover.com or through email, which is thn.academia@gmail.com. In this series, we've looked at culture and how culture can play a significant part in forming the way we think. And then how we end up forming a grid of looking at the world through. And that would be the concept of worldview. So we've looked at culture, we've looked at worldview, and now we're applying it to different models. And what actually we're following is the Welt or the Welt system developed by the Germans. This system starts with the Weltbild, which is the culture, and then it takes into consideration all the factors that come in to form a subconscious and a conscious way of looking at the world, forming a grid. And all those factors could be just environment, it could be genetic, it can be family, it can be everything that comes down to form that thinking pattern. That thinking pattern then is applied to the world or looking at the world through that thinking pattern. And that Weltbild, what it actually signifies is a world picture. And so we formed a picture of the world through all these factors. And then we go from a Weltbild to a Weltanschauung, which is actually literally worldview. And so then we actively view the world through the picture that's been formed through the Weltbild stage. And after viewing the world, then we put together a model of how that world is. And we model reality and compare it to reality. And that is what phase we're in now, is making models, making scientific models based on our Weltanschauung, which is our worldview, and which is based on our Weltbild, which is our world picture. This is the second phase of the origins. The first phase was built on the Weltbild of a Western mindset, Western way of looking at things, a Western worldview, and how that would create a certain model in the sciences. In this particular series now, we're looking at it through a non-Western point of view. But first, we've based this series on a quote by Stephen Jay Gould, and him being a scientist, biologist, paleontologist also. He said, "First facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. Theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them." That was an interesting quote, in that a scientist is saying that and agreeing with that there are influences that a person cannot shed, that we all come with our influences, our biases, and we cannot undo them. What we can do is by consensus adopt a different bias, adopt a different worldview, adopt a different culture, and therefore adopt a model. But what Stephen Jay Gould is saying is that in the practice of studies, of analyzing, of looking at things, like we had questions, different types of questions, scientific questions, theological questions, philosophical questions. We have questions about the world we live in. We invite an expert, and that expert then studies and then gives us the results, but those results are a product of those lenses that expert is using. So what that means is that it's not just input-output of data, but it's input, and then that data is interpreted by a person who then submits or gives it the coloring of his personal background, of his personal training, which then gives a result that is colored. It may be true, it may be faithful to as much as it can, but really what the interpretation is faithful to the lenses and to the interpretation process. What Stephen Jay Gould was saying was that it is not just a clean process of data in and facts out. What it is data in, and the facts are according to the scientist and that group of scientists that have interpreted those facts. In this series, what we're looking at is the origins of scientific models, and specifically now we're looking at a non-Western cultural perspective. What did that look like? Well, what we've got is, again, going back to the house diagram, we have ground zero, which is the Weltbild, which is all the personal pressures, factors that start with the environment, that start with the family, that go with the training, that go with the belief system, that goes with the choices made, and that all forms a cultural or a Weltbild that the house sits on. Then we, number one, on top of that, then we choose a reliable source of knowledge. And those reliable sources of knowledge, there was 4 of them, basics in philosophy. It's in intuition, it's authoritarian, it's logical, and or empirical. Those are all the 4 different sources of knowledge. And based on those sources of knowledge, then we form our basic belief system. Basic belief is something that is basic to the building of our system of thinking. These are basic, and they're corollaries to and related to our source of reliable knowledge that we have chosen. Then we go up to our methods to resources, and then resources to conclusions. And that is what the 4 factors of what Stephen Jay Gould had mentioned was culture, prejudice, theory, and habit, and how they relate to the housing perspective. Okay, so what we're starting with in the project now is that we're starting at ground zero. We're starting with the Weltbild, which is life experiences, which is surrounding environment, which is the culture and beliefs. All of these come together to form our basis of what we're looking at, how we look at the world. Now we're looking at this as from non-Western tendencies. We've already done a full series on Western tendency and what that means and what that can signify, which all goes all the way back to the first part of the series on culture, on Western and non-Western. And now what we're looking at is building a house of thinking based on a non-Western concept of cultural tendencies. And what might that look like? How might that be different? Well, number one is in the universal domains, is that in a non-Western concept of their real world, there is not a natural world with a supernatural world that can appear once in a while or is out there somewhere. Their physical world is dominated by their spirits, by their spiritual beliefs. And so what they have is that their universal domains are not 2 separate domains of natural and supernatural, but it is creator and created. A lot of the tribal groups that would be extreme non-Western, they have in their belief system of long ago of a type of creator God. And that creator God may not be active as much anymore in their daily lives, but what may be active is still a spiritual presence. And that spiritual presence may be evil and it may be good. But they all recognize that those spirits are created. They are part of the created world. They are not the supreme creator God. But, so in other words, their world is dominated by everything that was created. In other words, there are not separations of worlds, of domains. There isn't a natural, supernatural. It is a physical domain that is very much dominated by the spiritual world. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is the universal operating system, is that because they are not separate, that the spirit domain, or not domain, the spiritual dimension is very active in the physical dimension, is that they live in an open system, completely open, 24/7, meaning that there is no closed system of being a natural world from the supernatural. The Western science depends on a closed system. This group, non-Western, does not believe in a closed system. They believe in a very open system, so very different, very distinct. In this open system, the open system then is governed not by natural laws, but by the creator or other created power sources. And so therefore, when they are going to do something, whether it be fishing or hunting or chopping down trees or what, they negotiate with the spirits of those domains or with those areas, whether they be spirit of the forest or spirit of the valley or spirit of the mountains, spirit of the rivers, spirit of, and so they make sacrifices and they recognize the authority, the external authority. And that's what we're getting on to point number three. The external authority is that they themselves, the non-Western person, does not have the authority to do something on their own. They seek permission from that external authority. And to chop wood, chop down a tree, to go fishing, hunting, they seek permission from the authorities, the spiritual authorities of those areas. So they are a very dependent and cooperative people within themselves. Number four, the sources of reference. Their sources of reference, compared to the other thinking patterns. The other thinking patterns include the Greek mythology, the allegorical thinkings, the fictional writings. In this case, the non-Westerners are very historical, very concrete-based, historically minded. So they compare everything to what they've experienced. And so their sources of references are historical. So what would be then, based on those operating systems, what are their sources of knowledge? What would be the source of knowledge? In the Western house, the source of knowledge was chosen as logical knowledge, and that is reason-based, and that is human reason-based. And another close second in the Western would be empiricism, empirically based, observation based, experience based, the five senses. And what those two sources of knowledge represent is the competition or the tension between the idealism, and that would be thinking inside the mind, versus realism, which is experience based externally. So in this case, what would be the reliable source of knowledge for the non-Western mindset? Would that be intuition? And it could be, but being external authority, their intuition being internal is usually not something they rely on. Would it be authoritarian knowledge? Number two, yes. They are very authority-based, and the authoritarian knowledge means that the locus of authority is external to them in some way. Now, authoritarian-based could be another person, it could be a document, a book, it could be revelation. And that's what we are going to focus on in this one. We are focusing on a particular people group, particular culture, which is the non-Western would be the Hebrew culture, because we're going to be looking at their scriptures and their writings. So they would not necessarily choose logical or empirical, because those are human based. They would project out into what their knowledge would be based on authoritarian knowledge. So we're putting together the foundation of the house. So the foundation is external authority, it's biblical revealed knowledge in an open system. To have revealed knowledge, you have to have an open system. If there are people that insist on a closed system, then as a result, obvious result, you cannot have revealed knowledge in a closed system. So this is a external locus of authority. It is revealed knowledge, and specifically biblical revealed knowledge in an open system based on the non-Western cultural tendency. That is the foundation of what we are building on this house. This represents a real group of people, and it represents a real tendency that is going to be real contrary to the first cultural group that we looked at. Again, thank you for joining me. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist, and this is going to be the first of a six-part video series lecture on the non-Western foundation, the non-Western cultural tendency of building a house of thinking. Again, thank you, and look forward to seeing you again in the next one.